Hello, welcome to Star Frontiers Gamer. I'm Tom, aka Gedeon, your host. Today we're talking about void space and void jumping. In science fiction, there's a little bit of hand waving that always takes place for hyperspace, warp speed, jump space. It's just the convention that we employ to make faster than light travel possible in a science fiction setting. When the Alpha Dawn rules came out, it was simply called faster than FTL, faster than light travel, along established travel routes, is how the rules put it. The rule of thumb ruling was that a journey took a number of days equal to the number of light years traveled. Thus, a 5 light year trip would take 5 days. When Nighthawks came out, we learned a little bit more about faster than light travel. It was now called void travel or void jumping. Nighthawks established a standard of thrust for starships called the ADF, which stood for acceleration deceleration factor. An ADF of 1 was the slowest speed in the board game portion of the rules. There's a statement in the rules where it equated. It told us that ships would accelerate at 1 g, and that this is about the same acceleration a ship uses when it increases its speed on the board game map by 1 hex per turn. So it's not explicit. It doesn't explicitly say 1 g equals 1 ADF, but everybody inferred that from this statement. The problem with this is that the math does not actually bear out. According to a fellow Star Frontiersman who is an astronomer, the math on 1 ADF is actually 2.8 Gs. So that about is a little bit off. I generally handle this inconsistency in one of 2 ways. When a ship has an ADF of 1 as its maximum speed, that ship can regulate its speed to 1 G for the comfort of the passengers. Statement in the rules that said 1 G was about equivalent to 1 ADF. It's not actually 1 ADF. So they throttle it down to make the ship comfortable for passengers and crew to move about on the ship. Now, the second way I handle this is the existence of the inertia screen in game has implications for the possibility of inertia fields used as an inertia compensator. In my game, the technology underlying the inertia screen is used in this way in vehicles. So you're driving in a car going down the road and it crashes. There's an inertia field / screen under the seat you're sitting in, and it kicks on in a crash to protect you from all of the forces going on from the impact of the crash. So this to me seemed like a typical application of this technology, since it exists in a defensive screen to protect you from damage and somebody shooting at you. It also seemed likely that they would apply it in vehicles as vehicle safety. So all vehicles have this. There's one caveat that you cannot have an active defensive screen, because in the rules, it's very clear you can only have one defensive screen active at a time. And so I just hand wave and rule that what that means is that if 2 were trying to operate in the same space, it would cause interference and burn one of them out. So when you're riding in a car, you don't want to have a defensive screen active, because that inertia screen in the car might kick in to try to save your life in a crash. So on spaceships, because you're dealing with high Gs, they also install these inertia fields into the acceleration couches that you would stay strapped in for, say, during combat or high G maneuvers. And so the technology gets applied there to keep the crew from passing out, keep the passengers from complaining too much that they were thrown around in the ship. And it's not that it's a full up compensator that protects the whole ship. You must be strapped down in an acceleration couch when the ship is going to 2, 3, 4, 5 ADF, which would be seriously high Gs. Now I'm sure there are fighter pilots in the real world who have handled some of these high G's without the benefit of an inertia compensator. But they're trained for that. That's kind of, the military trains them for that. So I just, for the average Joe Blow going into space in this setting, because it's very much it's not the elite astronauts going into space. It's kind of like everyday people almost. They have these inertia fields put in the acceleration couches. The next issue is that AD Alpha Dawn reported that an interstellar jump would take a number of days equal to the number of light years. However, Nighthawks, with void speed being at 1% of light speed, the distance in game is 180 hexes, which will take the same amount of time despite the number of light years traveled. So a ship's accelerating to 1% of light speed. It's doing it at 1G or 1ADF, whatever. It's 180 hexes travel within game. It's the same whether you're going 5 light years or 7 light years or 8 light years. It just doesn't matter. Next, we have that the time in void space is specifically stated in Nighthawks to be just a short few moments. So that doesn't change, and that doesn't impact the length of trip, whether you're going 5 light years or whether you're going 8 light years. It just doesn't matter. Now, Nighthawks goes on to say that, quote, because faster than light ships travel at 1 light year per day, this number is also the number of days needed to travel this route. This time includes takeoff and landing, maneuvering in orbit, passenger loading, and all other normal procedures. That's on page, I believe, 49 in the Nighthawks manual. So you've got all this other stuff going on that's not actually travel time. And yet the rule here reinforced by Nighthawks is it's 1 light year per day for everything that needs to go on. But it doesn't make any sense, because just the travel time, everything that needs to go on for a 5 light year jump is kind of the same as for an 8 light year jump. So you would get to it doesn't make any sense. Now, it's a bit of a disconnect, but there's one other consideration, and that is the time it takes to plot the jump. The rules tell us that an astrogator must spend 10 hours per light year of travel plotting the jump. Now, since the standard galactic day is 20 hours and the character only works for 10, it would take an astrogator a number of days equal to 1 light year to compute a jump. But that's all of that time must be spent before the jump is made. So even on the other end, they're still going to spend another close to like 2 days decelerating in that system. So taking into account the rules for an astrogator plotting a jump, it's really the number of light years jumped in days plus 2 more for deceleration at the other end, providing it's not a military craft and you're going to full military deceleration like with an assault scout, being able to throttle it down to throttle the thrust to 5 ADF, which is really high, but everybody's going to have to stay strapped into a seat, because that high of G's is just crushing. So my solution is that the Alpha Dawn rule of 1 light year per day, or 1 day per light year, is just a rule of thumb. It could be possible for the trip to take a little less time due to numerous circumstances, like maybe multiple astrogators working together to compute the jump, or perhaps one astrogator already began computing the jump while the rest of the crew are handling cargo and getting passengers off, refueling and doing all the stuff that needs to be done. But the astrogator has already spent a couple of days in system working on the jump before the ship even starts moving. This would allow for game masters and players to shave a day off a journey here or there if the story warrants that. The 1 day per light year remains the rule of thumb, with the assumption that the astrogator must have started work before the jump began, before the ships began moving in system. If a crew is starting from a cold start, the ship would be delayed an extra 2 days for this trip, because it's going to need those extra 2 days approximately to decelerate in the next system. So they would spend the full, if it's a 5 light year jump, they'll spend the five days of the astrogator computing the jump. And if you had an astrogator say, well, I'll just work around the clock, that's when I would start adding on some penalties that might trigger the ship to do a misjump and not end up where they want to end up. So it's very much, if you start from a cold start, it's going to be the full time to compute in days, and then you can make the jump, and you're still going to need another 2 days on the other end to decelerate. And if the game involves a ship where the players as crew, where the players are the crew, it might be a good idea just to have an NPC astrogator if the PC astrogator is going to go on adventures, so that the NPC astrogator can be plotting those jumps and it doesn't slow down the game. So that's all of the rules covering void jumping. And those are how I handle some of the little small inconsistencies, my adaptions for them. What are your adaptions? How have you modified the game to make it better? I mean, I've often thought that it would actually be more fun to maybe have it be at a certain point in the timeline, they have better technology, and now it only takes 1 hour per light year to compute a jump. That seemed like a much more fun rule adaptation. But now that I look at the math on this 1 light year per day for travel, I'm kind of good with the 10 hours per, 10 hours of plotting per light year. But I might get talked into doing 5 per light year, so cut the time in half a little bit. So those are my adaptions. That's how I've handled it so far in game. Go ahead, put a comment below. Let me know how you've done it. And this is Tom for Star Frontiers Gamer signing out, and I'll see you in the frontier.